You are listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. You are listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski. I'll be your host on this adventure. Joining me today is Dr. Lynn Laird of Healing Heart Counseling in Meridian, Idaho. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. Glad to be here.
Those of you who've maybe been subscribing for a while or you've watched previous shows, you know Lynn has been a previous guest. We have been talking about doing some regular shows together because Lynn is a psychologist. I'm a certified behavioral analyst, a certified motivational analyst, executive coach type kind of guy. And so we have kind of a common wavelength of things that we talk about when it comes to looking at the reasons why people do what they do. It's kind of a fun conversation. So we thought we might record some of those things and share them as we go. One of those things lately being Nancy Pelosi. Why is she doing what she's doing? We might get to that here in a bit. But Lynn, before we jump into Nancy, I wanted to share a story that a friend of mine posted on Facebook about a coffee house in Arizona, in Tucson, called Viva Coffee House. They're on Valencia Road in Tucson, Arizona. So when they open up, you need to go back and give them some love. But they got shut down because they walked in and the person behind the counter was not wearing a mask.
Oh, boy.
And I first need to say that the county resolution 2020-49 clearly states that masks are only required in public places when the 6-foot spacing can't be achieved. She's standing behind the counter. There's no customers in line. There's no need for a mask, and yet they cited her. Listen to this. Listen to this. They shut her down. They shut down this coffee house because they're a public nuisance, dangerous to the public health as defined by the provisions of Arizona revised statutes that cause an immediate and imminent risk to the public health.
Yeah.
What do you think?
When nobody's there.
And nobody's there.
Yeah.
I have here, now you and I both live in Idaho, Lynn.
Yes, we do.
I pulled up the number of deaths per 100,000 people in the state of Idaho. These are websites, you can find any state on these websites as to how many people died with certain diseases. COVID-related deaths. Keep in mind, that's COVID-related deaths. You may have died of a heart attack, but you had COVID, and therefore they label you as a COVID death.
Yes.
That happened, right? We know that happened because Dr. Birx on the task force, the coronavirus task force, told us that's what they were doing. But let me tell you how many people die of diabetes. More than COVID. More suicides than COVID. More Alzheimer's deaths than COVID, more strokes than COVID, more lung disease than COVID, more cancer than COVID. So can you imagine getting a shutdown notice because, well, you know what, we've determined that your place of business, it's conducive to people committing suicides. We're gonna have to close you down because you're a public nuisance. I'm going out on a big.
Well, they'd have to shut down social media then too, right?
There you go. Could do that.
Yep.
What is your take on this public nuisance stuff with something that is basically the equivalent of a very virulent flu?
I'm disgusted by it. I'm saddened by it, but I'm not surprised by it. Not anymore. I think right now it's going to take a lot to surprise me. Just watching how everything is changing in terms of the government overreach and squeezing of the people. You know, what's happened here in Idaho even, up in Moscow, in Caldwell lately, where we've had people going to football games and standing completely outside of the stadium, and shutting down a football game for that. Up in Moscow, where people were coming together to sing and worship outside, but within 6 feet of each other, and people getting arrested for that. The lady, I think it was, I forget which state it was, the one that got tased at her son's football game.
That was Ohio.
Ohio, yeah. So, you know, might as well shut down a coffee house too. Like I said, sadly, it's not surprising to me.
Well, it's to me, there's this deception. In fact, I don't know which is going to hit the streets first, like this podcast with article that I'm writing, but I'm working on a column for Uncover DC called "A Great Deception is all around us," and I really think that's what it is. It's a deception.
I agree, wholeheartedly.
This, by the way, and I'm going to give a little teaser to this column. I was over at a friend's house for dinner the other night. And after the meal, he goes and turns on football. Now, I have sworn off football because I'm not going to support them because they're so social justice warrior types now. And I'm not going to even support their advertisers in any way by having my TV on. But I was at a friend's house. He wanted to watch football. So I sat down. We watched football. And we're watching a few plays. And everything looks normal, except for the refs wearing a face mask and coaches. It's kind of a joke because the coaches kept pulling on their face mask to talk and then putting it back up, and it's like
defeats the whole purpose.
Anyways, I'm watching a couple plays, and then they pulled back and they kind of showed the whole stadium, and there's nobody in the stands.
No,
they're 100% empty, and I'm going, what's with the crowd noise? There's crowd noise going on.
Oh, it's like a sitcom.
They are piping in crowd noise to make the viewer feel comfortable.
Wow.
Like it's a normal game.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, what's wrong with this picture just on a very fundamental principled level? I mean, I get that they're trying to make it as normal as possible, but it's fake.
Yeah.
It's not real. We're being fooled, and it's a deception to make us feel comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And isn't that what's going on? I'm sitting back thinking about this going, that's what's going on with this whole scamdemic.
Yes, yes. I keep saying that the emperor is wearing no clothes, but everybody's standing around pretending like this is way bigger than what it actually is, that it's something completely different than what it actually is.
When I pulled this up and realized that we have more people dying of diabetes, more people dying of suicide and Alzheimer's and stroke, and I bet you that goes across the country in every state.
Yeah.
It is unfathomable to me that we're making such a mountain out of what is, in essence, a molehill. Yeah. Obviously, we don't want to, discount people's deaths. But when you take a look at the number of deaths in this country, year to year, we've experienced a 1.2 or 1.1% increase in the number of deaths in this country every year for the past 4 or 5 years. It's called the baby boomers are dying off, right? So we're seeing more deaths, and we have people arguing that, oh look, we have 1.2% more deaths this year than last year. This is COVID. It's like, no, look at the trends. Look at the numbers.
Yeah. Well, and also I think you have to look at what are people dying of. And like you had mentioned before, people dying with COVID versus dying from COVID. So to even look at those statistics, they're essentially meaningless because there's no context. When you look at the comorbidities and, somebody was basically on their deathbed already and got COVID and they died, now it's a COVID death versus cancer or Alzheimer's or, take your pick.
Right.
Those numbers truly, I don't think are terribly meaningful. And when you look at the bigger picture, what is that increase in suicide? I've been, at first I wasn't hearing a whole lot personally, or in my circle about the increase in suicide, but I'm starting to hear more and more people that I know whose family members have committed suicide. I'm starting to see more patients who truly are falling apart because of what has happened. Teenagers, young adults, whose lives have been ripped apart, completely ripped apart because of the response to COVID. And so I think that the whole way that we're looking at it, or not we as in the average person necessarily, but the government and all the mandates and all of that, It's so myopic. It's focused on one thing and only one thing. Like this one thing is so much more important than all the other things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people's mental health, their financial stability, their housing stability, their ability to feed themselves. All of those things are so important too.
You are touching on something, a conversation that I had with my wife yesterday, that we have become so focused on the experts and what the experts say, right?
Yeah.
And we're taking away what she calls the Renaissance man, the value of the Renaissance man.
Yeah.
She referred to Isaac Newton, who developed calculus, who had discovered the law of gravity, and he did so many things on so many levels, you know, biblical scholar, and he was so well versed in so many topics. And when you have someone who can see things in many, many directions, they see the ripple effects of a decision in those different directions. But you get someone like Fauci, who's been in the same position for 30, 40 years, and he's the expert. Yeah, he might be an expert, but when he makes a decision, and I saw this right away. All of these decisions made from the coronavirus task force, they were all medical experts. There was no board of directors, no team of rivals, so to speak, of people looking at it from different perspectives, and looking at the ripple effects. And so I saw them making these decisions, like you said, and I'm thinking, it's one of the first things I looked at was the suicide rates.
Yep.
We're going to see a huge increase in suicide rates from this.
Yeah, and we have. We knew that months ago, but like I said, just now I'm starting to personally hear more of those stories, and it's heartbreaking. It's maddening, really. You know, trading one life for another is kind of how I'm looking at it. You know, okay, well, we're going to save some lives over here, maybe, but probably not, in my opinion.
So, so what do we need to do with these? I mean, I look at what these governors are doing, these mayors are doing, and they're patting themselves on the back. They think they're so self-righteous.
Yeah.
To the general population who's not an elected official, right, which is like 99.999% of us.
Most of us, yes.
Well, we need to start standing up. Wouldn't you agree and say enough?
I do agree. I think the problem is knowing how. You know, you have one person standing in one place and you have a small group somewhere else. You know, and for the most part, good law-abiding citizens, but whose rights are being trampled by, you know, these powerful entities that have the power to shut down your business. They have the power to arrest you and put you in jail or fine you. And it's difficult for one person to stand alone.
But you can do it. You can do it.
You can.
And, you know, it's like you have Martin Luther King, who advocated for nonviolent resistance, right? And I am totally prepared. I mean, I have not worn a mask since this whole thing started. If I walk into a store and they say I need a mask, I say I can't wear a mask. And they say, well, you need one to be in here. And I go, okay. I guess I should throw the caveat out there. We do live in Idaho.
We do live in Idaho.
And that is one of my understanding is there are some states that are still in full mask Nazi mode, and you can't even, you know, walk into any building without a mask.
Yeah.
So I guess there are those places.
Yes, and like this coffee shop that you're talking about, you know, they're being shut down. You know, how does the coffee shop stand against being shut down?
And here we go, taking it to a much, much bigger picture, because now you're talking about what is this real agenda.
Yeah.
And now we can talk about Nancy Pelosi. because Nancy Pelosi is pushing for the removal of Donald Trump in any way she can.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what avenue she's going to try to take it. She's going to push on every possible door. I wrote a column for Uncover DC a while back about the how we're following Lenin's playbook from his 1917 insurrection to take over what became the Soviet Union. And he had a kind of a multi-pronged approach. I call them now street Marxists, which is the BLM, the Antifa people. And then you've got the vanguard Marxists, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, the Adam Schiffs, and they're fighting at the political level. But we're talking about trying to institute or invoke a Marxist way of governing. They're trying to overthrow our constitutional form of government.
Yeah.
So I think Gavin Newsom is, not just waist deep, he's neck deep in that.
Yeah. Certainly appears so. Yeah.
Is this how you're seeing it too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've been seeing the seeds being planted and watered for decades, and this has just given the opportunity to harvest, I think, and we're seeing the fruit of the seeds that have been planted in our school systems and it just throughout our government, just little bits here and there that it's kind of like that frog in the boiling water analogy.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it.
Gosh, we could talk about the whole path, the whole projection path of the past 10 years, past 12 years.
Yeah.
But it has gone back for decades, as you say. I remember, because, I'm pushing 60. So I remember fifth grade teacher, I think 1970, 1971. Here's my teacher, she writes on the board, communism. And then she writes below that, capitalism. And she spends a little time talking about how these are two very extreme forms of government.
Extreme.
And how we shouldn't have either one, but socialism. And she wrote that in between the two. She writes socialism. Now that's a happy medium, and that's where we should be going as a country. So even go back as far as 1970, 1971, here's our teacher trying to feed us this information, trying to program us that socialism is the way to go. So here I am pushing 60 next year. A lot of us voters between 20 and 60 have been listening to that in school ever since.
Indeed.
But here's the issue. I go back to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was leading the pack. He had quite the ground support. But I found out that Bernie bros, people who would support Bernie, 35% of the people that they polled, Democrats, were comfortable with a socialist president. So I sat back and thought, at best they're going to get 45% of the vote. And that means Donald Trump slams Sanders 55% of the vote. They just could not live with that.
Yeah. So
they had to get Bernie out. But I think they're setting things up for 2024 because it's hard to beat an incumbent. They're trying their damnedest.
Yes, they are. This is true.
And they're going to try to do it through mail vote fraud. Totally different topic. But I think Trump's going to get reelected, but they're setting up Kamala Harris for 2024. I think they're going to have enough people comfortable on the left to vote for a socialist president in 2024, and that's their goal. If they can't get Trump out now, they will probably succeed in 2024 with getting a socialist in the White House.
I think it's pretty likely. I mean, you can just see the shift socially. Where, back to the whole thing with masks. And I've been seeing this with the vaccine debate too, if we want to get into a whole other topic. But the phrasing, that my mask protects you, your mask protects me, that everything that we do should be for each other. And fundamentally, I don't disagree with, being mindful of other people and certainly, sacrificing for other people, but it should always be a personal choice to do that or not. Mm-hmm. But when you see that phrasing, that like literally I will walk and to a facility and there's a sign that will say, my mask protects you, your mask protects me. So that now if I don't wear a mask, then I am being selfish and I don't care about you. And same thing with vaccines, that, we have to have, everybody getting a vaccine in order for it to work, which I think is really interesting. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But this is what we've been programmed for years, hearing over and over again, and obviously not with the masks, but certainly, for the last several months, we're hearing it over and over again. And it's that whole idea of subjugating the individual for the so-called greater good, which goes along with the socialism and communism. And it's my belief that there is no greater good without individual liberty. And so the shift in worldview and thinking is much more, I don't know, it's insidious, because I think fundamentally the idea is right, that we do care about our fellow man, and we do step out and on occasion even make sacrifices for other people. But again, that's a personal choice to do that, and not a government entity coming in and saying, you need to, you must.
Right.
And so I can see that socially in just that one area, how people have had a shift in the way that they think. And so it really fits in very nicely, I think, with the socialist agenda, that we don't think about our own rights. Our own rights are now considered selfish.
It's like you read that paragraph in my column.
I might have read a paragraph in your column.
This is coming out today or tomorrow.
Oh, well, then I haven't read it if it's not been out yet.
But we're on the same wavelength. I said, here's what we're told. If you wear a mask, you're protecting other people. Mm-hmm. But here's a psychology that accompanies that message. If you don't wear a mask, you're selfish, and you don't care if people get sick and die.
Well, and that's what we're being told. I mean, literally to your face at times. If you're not wearing a mask, then you're being selfish. And it's just astounding to me that people can think that they don't consider that maybe people aren't wearing a mask for one of a myriad of reasons, really.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I wrote about that in a column back in July, where I linked to sources of women who've been raped, and were, taped over their mouth and that kind of stuff, and they tried to be good, and they put on a mask and went to the store, and they just freaked out. They just were literally, I think she described herself as being more wet from sweat than if she had just taken a shower. I mean, she was just sopping wet with sweat, and she had to take off the mask and leave the store.
Yeah. Well, and I was reading recently, one of our legislators here in Idaho had posted on his social media that he had just received a letter from a rape victim who, had had her mouth covered during the offense. And she too has struggled with wearing a mask, and that the muffled sound, of her screams during that time. And then she was in a store and someone said something to her, and when she was trying to speak, that muffled sound triggered her, and she about fell apart. And then this same legislator said, I'm getting more stories. They're coming through. I'm going to be sharing them soon. And that's what I've been saying from the get-go. Rape, to me, that's the most obvious one, but there are so many other situations that.
You know what? I was listening to the one of the broadcasts from Central District Health here in Southern Idaho. Mm-hmm. And the medical director from St. Al's Health, I'm going to name the health guy, forget the guy's name, probably good reason. But he's some big hunchy poo doctor with St. Al's healthcare system here in Idaho, and he should be ashamed, and that healthcare system should be ashamed that he said what he said at that meeting that was broadcast, and you can go back and watch it on YouTube. He says there is no reason that anybody should not wear a mask. He said, if
That's a
you're
lie.
in a wheelchair and you're on oxygen, then you shouldn't be going out in the first place. But if you're leaving your house, you should be wearing a mask. And I just wanted to say, let's go introduce you to some rape victims, sir, and let you talk to them. Because this
Indeed.
guy couldn't have been more cold-hearted, more ignorant of the situation. I was yelling at the screen. I'm thinking, who the hell do you think you are? And if you're watching this, Mr. Whoever you are at St. Al's, I hope you are ashamed, and I hope you get back and apologize for what you said at Central District Health. That is just asinine to me.
Yeah. Well, and that's the really frustrating thing for me too, is that let's just say, for argument's sake, that masks work the way they say they do. Just, I'll give them that for this argument. Even still, there are many reasons that people cannot and should not wear a mask. And certainly people with post-traumatic stress, other anxiety disorders, and how many physical problems, lung diseases like asthma, COPD, heart conditions, anything where you're breathing, which, that's a whole nother topic because I think we all need to breathe. But serious medical conditions that could be made worse, exacerbated by wearing a mask. Those are very real to the people who have those conditions. Mm-hmm. And to say that those people should just stay home, if they want to, sure. If they want to choose the risk of going out, why shouldn't they? We take risks every single day. If we get in our car, we're taking a risk. If we step outside our home, we're taking a risk. If we stay in our home, we're taking a risk.
Yeah. So
life has always been about taking risks.
I crunched some numbers yesterday because this column that I read, this deception, this fear. I crunched some numbers yesterday because I was curious. Because I saw a meme and I thought, I doubt those numbers. So I went and I looked up the numbers myself instead of trusting the numbers I saw on the meme. If you are under the age of 20, whether you have COVID or not, you are at a greater risk of getting struck by lightning than you are of dying of COVID.
I believe it.
And across the board, nationwide, no matter how old you are as equally likely to die in a car accident as you are to die from COVID at today's rate.
So we should all stop driving.
So yeah. So are we going to say that you're driving into our parking lot? So you're presenting a health risk to people letting you drive? We're letting people drive into your parking lot at your business. So we're going to close you down for public health safety reasons. This is just a huge deception. It's just asinine and the people are believing it. What's the psychology behind that, Dr. Laird?
Oh boy. Well, we love our experts. And, getting back to what you were saying before, now we just listen to experts. Experts know everything. And we think that we're stupid, apparently, that we can't do a little bit of research, that we can't use some logic and some reasoning. And especially when our experts have been known to have financial ties to certain industries, I think we need to be extremely skeptical and vigilant when we decide who we're going to be listening to.
I'm gonna jump in here and provide some information to back up what you just said and to underscore your warning, to be vigilant and be aware of what the financial ties are. Mm-hmm. We've heard Dr. Anthony Fauci say no to hydroxychloroquine. Well, there's no open tests. Well, 2005, his own National Institutes for Health, they published a paper that said hydroxychloroquine works in fighting coronavirus. Fancy that. 2010, Anthony Fauci was made on the leadership advisory team for the Decade of Vaccines for the Global Vaccine Initiative, started by, guess who? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Of course.
Okay, he's on the advisory team. Who resigns from the board of directors for Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway on the very same day that President Trump announces the national health emergency? Bill Gates resigns from those boards. And all of a sudden, Bill Gates is on TV pushing the need for vaccine. We're not going to get back to normal until we have a vaccine. And then I go and I'm doing some research. I see that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funding 7 different factories to get ramped up to make vaccines. Last year, they were doing that. And then Anthony Fauci's up there going, no, we can't treat that. No, we can't treat that. And I've interviewed some doctors on this show, and they said, no, the CDC has no recommendations for how to treat COVID unless they can't breathe. Then we bring them into the hospital and put them on a vent. That was the CDC's recommendation. Yeah. So when the expert, Mr. Fauci, yesterday, oh gosh, I'm on a roll here.
You're on a roll.
It's a Kaiser roll, but I'm on a Kaiser roll. The director of the National Institutes for Health was being interviewed, and he said they have a financial interest in Moderna. Okay, Moderna is creating the vaccine.
Indeed, they are.
Guess who funded Moderna 4 years ago to develop these RNA applications for viral? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, $20 million grant. Here you go. So we have the National Institutes for Health, we got Moderna, we got Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, and they're all financially tied to the wonderful vaccine that we're supposed to get. There's our expert. So I'm interrupting you to point out all this information to people. Say, if you didn't know this, now you do. Here is the financial reasons why we have this huge deception that we can't treat people with hydroxychloroquine. We can't use the Bartlett nebulizer protocol. We can't use the new program they got down in Florida. There's all these things that people are getting well, but nobody reports on it because we're waiting for that all-holy vaccine.
Indeed. Yep. And when you get people afraid, it's a lot easier to lead people when they're afraid. And so I think, all the fear mongering and everything from the get-go, it just makes people, they don't know where to turn. Most of us don't have much in the way of a medical background and understanding. And so who do we listen to,
So let's talk briefly about the scriptural mandates on this, because I hear a lot of Christians saying, well, we're supposed to obey the government. It says there in Romans 13, we're supposed to follow our government. And I heard a great response to that the other day. He says, well, when I look at the Constitution, it says, we the people.
We are the government.
That's the government, okay? Yeah. And then you look even at the Idaho Constitution, the very second paragraph there says that all political power rests in the people. So yeah, we're the government.
Yes, we are. We are. But again, just like with the average person is not terribly politically involved. They just, we go about our lives, we're supporting our families and working and, doing whatever recreation on the weekends and rinse and repeat. And as long as things are okay, most people aren't paying that close attention.
And I have noticed, Dr. Laird, that you have been getting more involved lately since all this stuff came down.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that transformation. I mean, what motivated you? What sparked you? Because as you said earlier, there's some people here who haven't been involved. They don't know what to do. What are some things that you've been doing?
Well, I've been meeting my legislators for the most part and talking with them. Obviously, a good portion of your audience may not be in Idaho, so the specifics might not be relevant there. But, we do think that our governor has overstepped his bounds. We have, found that he's suspending laws, and obviously the First Amendment violation when you shut down an economy and tell people that they can't go to church and they can't congregate in groups larger than, pick your number of the week, and all of that. So I've been meeting the legislators because they haven't been, blanking on the word. He called them into a special session to kind of suit his own needs. But other than that, they've been basically paralyzed and unable to act. So when our state got $2.5 or so billion from the federal government, it's up to the legislature to determine how to budget our finances. And they, not being in session during this time, have not been able to do that. And the governor has taken reign over that. So as we've, we, the people, are waking up and realizing that we have some problems in the way our government's being run, that it's not being run as a constitutional republic like it is supposed to, according to our Constitution, that there are some problems in the way that some of the laws have been written. And so for me right now, it's just really getting to know the legislators and who is running for legislature in November. They're all up for re-election. And so I just think it's really important to know who's running and what do they stand for and what's important to them, and do they really care about representing the people, or are they in the governor's pocket? And are they being somebody else's puppet? And you get to learn that when you sit down and talk with them for half an hour, 45 minutes, or a couple hours. And have had the privilege to do that recently.
Excellent. So, and that's a lot of times people don't think, gee, he's a elected representative, he's not going to want to listen to me. It's like, this guy or this gal is your neighbor.
I used to think that way. I think, like many other people, we put them up on a pedestal and kind of think like they're off limits, but they are human beings. We all are human beings. And if they would think of you as a nuisance, or, just think that you're insignificant and wouldn't give you the time of day, then they have no business representing you. And I've been, like I said, privileged to meet with quite a few, my personal representatives, as well as representatives from other parts of the state. And I think it's important to know not just your own representatives, but all of them, because once the legislature meets again and they're meeting in committees, your specific representatives might not be on those committees. So I think it's important to know a wide variety of the representatives, so that you can reach out to those that matter with that piece of legislation that you might be concerned about.
Good point. And for those of you who may not know, I am a regular guest on Alan Keyes' show, Let's Talk America, on the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month. And it's an honor to be a guest on his show. The man is just a genius. But you have, Alan reminded me that the word represent is to represent.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, he's supposed to a representative is supposed to represent our views to the body of lawmakers.
Yep.
And so you're absolutely right that if a person's not going to listen to you, then they're not really representing you. Mm-hmm. And yes, they may have different political views, and they may not speak your views because they don't agree with them, but they should listen to you respectfully.
At a minimum.
At a minimum, they should give you the time to talk with them, which means not calling them names, which means being respectful. I mean, your approach is going to determine your response. How you approach them will always determine that. And I remember meeting, there was a guy who ran for office here in Idaho who shared, I'm reading his views, hadn't met the guy, reading his views. I thought, wow, this guy totally aligns with what I believe. I'm totally going to support him. Well, he ended up not winning. And I ran into him about a year later. And I introduced myself and went to shake his hand and said, hey, I really supported you. I was all behind you. And the man wouldn't give me the time of day.
Wow.
He acted to me like I was a nobody. I shouldn't bother him. And I thought, whoa, I am glad you did not get elected if you're that arrogant.
Yeah.
I want my representative to at least listen to what I have to say. So that's a very good point, Lynn. We can, if you're listening to this, watching this, you can go out and contact your rep and say, hey, I'd like to talk with you. I'd like 5 or 10 minutes of your time just to share some views and get your perspective on something.
Mm-hmm.
Great suggestion.
Yeah, and I know locally around here in the Treasure Valley anyways, they're doing a lot of meet and greets right now, leading up to the election. Everything from the county commissioners, the highway district officials, the legislators, people that are going to be on the health boards. The county commissioners here are, appointed to those health boards. So even though they're not elected to those health boards, we at least have some elected officials on those health boards. So I think it's really critical that we know and understand how our local politics work. We look so much to what's happening on a national level, but really the day-to-day impacts come from those, local, the local politics. So it's important to know what's happening close to home too.
So you and I were both at that event last month where Charlie Kirk came through town?
Yes.
And one of the things Charlie Kirk, he for those of you who don't know, Charlie Kirk was assigned to work with Donald Trump Jr. and be an emissary to the youth, to reach out to America's youth for the Donald Trump campaign, but has since just really stepped out and been a very vocal proponent for pro-American values on college campuses. And one of the things that Charlie Kirk said was, if you don't know the names of your school board, if you don't know who's on your local school board, you might as well just expect your local region to turn Democrat in 5 or 6 years. Because all politics are local. And I think you're right, Lynn. We focus so much on what the news is feeding as president, 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 speaker, speaker, speaker kind of thing. And we're not paying attention to local events. And stuff like that is what happened like here in Boise, where we ended up with, we went from bad to worse in the mayor's office in Boise.
Indeed.
Because nobody was paying attention to what the person really wanted.
Well, and I think, going back to the school board thing too, I mean, that you look back to your opening story about when you were in 5th grade and what you were being taught that far back. And, what I was saying about how we've seen over the, decades, the frog in the boiling pot of water, it just gets turned up a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. And we're not paying attention. We're just going to work and hanging out and doing what we do, and not paying attention to what's happening in our schools and what the children are being taught. I forget the phrase, but how does it go? Where the what's happening in the school in one generation, is going to impact the whole world, the next generation. And I think that's what we're seeing. Where we were founded on such good, solid truth, and now truth is relevant, or not relevant. It's not relevant. It's relative.
Relative,
right? Yes. It's whatever you say it is, and that's a huge part of what's happened to our society and why we are where we are today.
It's amazing. I was watching a video of some gal being confrontational with some guy, and he's going, but ma'am, these are facts. And she responded with, but the facts don't matter. It's how we feel that's important. And I'm going, what? Where do you get on? What kind of logic is that? And then I realized that's what she's taught in school.
Not to disregard the value of feelings. They're real, but you can't throw away facts. You just can't throw them away. Well, I guess you can.
So we've been talking about a couple of things here so far. We talked about the deception and the coffee house thing. We've been talking about this. How do we get involved? Let's wrap up by talking a little bit about Nancy Pelosi and the whole concept of power and the addiction to power. Okay, so you're a psychologist. I'm a behavioral analyst, motivational analyst. One of the things that I work with executives for 30 years and helping them understand the ripple effects of their choices and why they do what they do, and how to look at different motivators and how they're formed and why people do what they do. So they understand, it's basically teaching them emotional intelligence. A lot of decisions are made on the emotional level, as this protester that we just got done talking about. She's making a decision on an emotional thing. But emotions are formed, just for our listeners, emotions are formed very early in age, and our values are attached to those from those emotions. be it a positive or a negative emotion. So let's say, I always teach in my classes the example of identical twins. And you have two kids in the yard, and you have a mom and a dad. Mom loves dogs. I'm sorry, mom loves cats. Dad loves dogs. Mom hates dogs. And they're two, 14-month-old kids. They're on the front yard for the very first time on the very first beautiful spring day of the year. And the neighbor comes walking down the street with this big old German Shepherd he just got from the pound, not trained, pulling on the leash, barking, snarling. The kid next to mom looks up and sees mom going, "Oh my gosh, my child is about to become a snack." And the kid looks up and sees mom fearful, and here's this strong emotion attached to this experience with the dog, right? That this is bad. Mom's afraid. This is bad. There's an emotional imprint.
Yeah.
Identical twin number 2 looks over to dad and sees dad going, "Hey, cool dog. This is awesome." So their emotional imprint is, here's a dog. Dad likes it. This is cool. Dogs are cool, right? And if that happens a couple of times, one identical twin becomes a dog hater and one becomes a dog lover. And that's just a very simple example to show how emotional events imprint us. And it's instant, it's unconscious, and we just make a decision, it's good or bad. And so you can have money motivation. You can have aesthetics motivation. You can have traditional motivations, different things that are emotionally imprinted in you. One of the 6 major categories or spectra of motivation is power. And when I'm working with executives, that is one of the key factors we have to consider.
Yep.
Because you can become addicted to these things. Any one of these things you become addicted to. More money, right? People who always have to have more. They become basically addicted to the financial aspect of the motivator.
Mm-hmm.
Power is the same thing. And so I look at Nancy Pelosi going, this woman just has to have power. And if she can't be in control, she kind of freaks out.
A little bit.
And because she has to have more. It's almost insatiable. She has to have more and more power.
Yeah.
Have you been watching her at all, or am I just being a Nancy Pelosi watcher from the side?
I've seen a little bit. I do my best to not, because it just riles me up. And because that is something I don't have control over. I don't have power over what she's doing. And so I try to focus my attention more on those things that I do feel like I have a sense of control over. And back to what's happening locally here. That's where I'm spending more of my time.
That's wise.
But I have seen a little bit of what you're talking about. Yeah.
To that point, I see a lot of people that I can't stand listening to, that I turn off when they start talking. And I realize why. It's because they lie.
Yeah.
And it just, I can't deal with the lying.
Mm-hmm. It's the lying and the posturing, the virtue signaling, all of that garbage going on. That I too just kind of have a very deep gut reaction to that, and I find that that's not very good for my mental health. And I need to stay focused on those things that are going to help me right now. And just seeing the hypocrisy with, the whole thing with the hair salon and all of that is just, wearing a mask kind of, when it suits the need, when it fits the narrative, or not, it just, the lack of consistency is disgusting.
It is. It's very disgusting. Whenever Obama was on the air, whenever I heard him on the news, I could be driving and they would play a quote. I just turn it off, because the guy, he's just so deceptive and so full of himself. I just couldn't stand listening to him. Yeah. So I would just turn him off. Nancy Pelosi is kind of humorous because half the time I think she's drunk. So it's like, what is she going to say this time? But Adam Schiff, my gosh, the guy is a perpetual liar. There is nothing that I believe anymore that comes out of that man's mouth. He's lied so much. Everything is wolf, wolf, wolf to him. He says he's going to produce data evidence. He never does. He says this, and always with confidence and always self-assured. and never produces any of it. It's all lies.
Yeah.
And I, you look at the political bases, you have probably 20 to 30% of a population, of any given population, that's going to be staunch left wing, and then staunch right wing, 30%, 20, 30%. And then you got the middle, and maybe even some 35, but you got to figure minimum 20.
Yeah.
So whatever Nancy Pelosi or Adam Schiff or Chuck Schumer, anybody gets up and says something, guaranteed 20% of the population are going to just parrot it like it was fact. And they will, without researching any of it, they will just say, well, this is true, and this is true. And even though you could look it up easily with a couple of clicks of a mouse and disprove it, I get people who ask me, well, prove that, back that up. It's like, you know what? I don't have time. But if I do that, I'm going to have to come over and cut your food for you too, right? Because you don't have the ability to click the mouse a couple of times, look it up yourself. I'm supposed to do your work for you. Mm-hmm. Anyways. Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Laird, I want to thank you for stopping by and spending some time with me today.
Yeah, thank you.
We've been talking about doing this on a regular basis. We'll see if we can do that. But I want to thanks again. This is Dr. Lynn Laird with Healing Heart Counseling in Meridian, Idaho. Yep. And of course, I'm Daniel Bobinski with New Book of Daniel. If you want to reach me, you can do that by contacting me via email, newbookofdaniel@outlook.com. You can find me on Twitter and MeWe and Parler. All of it is at New Book of Daniel. And of course, you can also go to Facebook at New Book of Daniel. It's facebook.com/New Book of Daniel. You can also, if you want to subscribe to this podcast, click the little subscribe button down below, or wherever you're listening to this, hit the subscribe. Want to leave a comment down below, feel free to do that. And of course, you can find what I write about with politics and current issues of the day at uncoverdc.com and also Red States. This is Daniel Bobinski with Dr. Lynn Laird. You're listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. We'll catch you on the next show. Until next time, be blessed.